So push it. Push reset.
We are kind of hemorrhaging data at the moment already across the internet. As we track around, data's just spilling out all over the place. And we're sharing more than we ever had. But what we're sharing at the moment is kind of like cheap food. It's very high in quantity, very low in nutritional value. If we want to shift from mass email marketing communications to very sort of hyper-personalized, hyper-segmented, one-to-one marketing, then we really need access to lots of fresh, tasty, nutritious, healthy data. And there's a few reasons why we're not getting this right now. Okay, the first is computing power at the moment is nowhere near as sophisticated as Mrs. Miggin's humble brain. Okay, now don't underestimate how rapidly this is going to change. Within the virtual blink of an eye, I think AI will be playing the main stage and Pandora's box will be irreversibly opened. The second challenge we have is that very few companies have access to the diversity of data that they need to truly understand people and give us the kind of experiences that we want online. And again, data is the silver bullet here. If you find that bullet and a gun to fire it, then we're really on the way. The third problem we have is that people are instinctively cautious. And that is slowing the adoption of these technologies and the quality of the data that's feeding them. If we can unlock people's reticence to share data, then of course companies start to get access to more and more data, which then allows the AI adoption to really take off. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes looking at why people currently don't really want to share data with companies. So the first is fear. Okay, now this is fairly self-explanatory. War, terrorism, political insanity, economic turmoil. We're living in a world that is highly volatile and very uncertain. And you compound this with cyber attacks, massive data breaches, Snowden-esque whistleblowing, and of course all these horror stories about identity theft. And you can kind of see why people are just pulling in at a time when really we should be pushing out. And I mentioned earlier this sense of we're losing control over our data. Now, most jurisdictions around the world build laws around consent. So consent is often a big pillar. But I have good reason to tell you that this whole consent model is completely flawed. From a legal perspective, it's universally the safest way to prove that what you're doing with people's data is fair and lawful. So businesses around the world rely heavily on consent to justify what they're doing. But when you think about how consumers give consent, you start to realize that it's a complete farce. You download an app, you get the app T's and C's, you don't read them. Privacy notices tell you about how companies use their data. Nobody reads them. Pop-ups, cookie notices, all the rest of it, right? Nobody reads any of them except the regulators and the lawyers who wrote them. Yet, people are signing these things and are actually legally bound by them. The other issue I think we're having is around the user experience. So while we are out there agreeing to everything but really not agreeing to anything, I think the user experience online these days is actually not that good. Okay, don't take that personally, but if you look at simple things like programmatic and ad targeting and retargeting, where you're online searching for a Barbie, you buy the Barbie, and then for 2 weeks afterwards you're getting ads for the Barbie, or if you're not getting ads for that Barbie, you're getting ads for that Barbie. It's actually quite a crappy experience. So while we all think we're very edgy and cutting edge, actually I think there's a lot to be done in this whole space. And again, it creates a bit of unease amongst the consumers who we want to kind of relax and open up and start sharing more data so that they can get cooler shit. Spam. I mean, who talks about spam these days? It all goes into a junk box. But, spam is to the internet what graffiti is to a subway. It's not that bad. It's kind of a given part of the internet experience. But again, it creates this kind of sense of, my data's out there. People keep messaging me. I don't know how they get my details and so on. And what's happening is we're hitting this kind of ad nauseam. People... instead of opting in, they're opting out en masse. They're ad blocking, they're ad skipping, they're buying ad-free subscriptions. And now, I don't know about you, but in Europe, cookies could be seriously disrupted, which will completely bugger up the whole ad tech supply chain. Who knows? But in this kind of journey to a hyper-connected, AI-first world, the world is not looking that rosy. Now, people may assume that the law will be the savior, that the law will come in and it will take away the vagabonds and the thieves, restore trust in people. But no, it won't. The law is an ass. Okay, now this is coming from a lawyer and I'll explain what I mean, but take it from me, the law is an ass in this space. Now, those of you familiar with Dickens' Oliver Twist might recognize that phrase is coming from Mr. Bumble, the downtrodden husband of a very domineering wife who, after some misdemeanor, was taken to court, and the judge said to Mr. Bumble, "The law supposes that your wife acts under your command," to which Mr. Bumble replied, "If the law supposes that, the law is an ass." Now, he was talking about an ass as in a donkey, an animal with an unfortunate reputation for being stubborn and stupid. That's where we get the word asinine from. He was really objecting to the absurdly rigid application of the law to his unfortunate circumstances. So why do I say that the law is an ass? I say it because the law is a terrible blueprint for building trust in consumers. The law will not make people want to share more data. It will not make people feel more relaxed about really engaging and opening their arms up to brands. And anyone who uses the law as a roadmap to data nirvana is going to find themselves up the proverbial creek without a paddle. But let's be clear, I'm not advocating breaking the law. This needs the same attention as antitrust or anti-bribery. In Europe, some people may have heard of the General Data Protection Regulation, which will kick in next year, the GDPR. This is by a mile the toughest data protection laws in history of man, where the tolerance for failure will evaporate and crippling fines will come in. But in some ways, again, the law is already here. And those guardrails that the GDPR and similar laws around the world create are actually a very good thing. It's just right now we're all bumping along trying to work out how we're going to build businesses that kind of comply with these laws and don't expose us to these massive risks. But the governance of data is here. Okay, and all the innovation that will follow will broadly have to come into line with these regulations. And I think that's a good thing. The trouble is, you've got more chance of pinning jelly to the side of a moving train than you have changing social attitudes to data sharing through regulation. So what do? What I would say we don't do is do not build your data and privacy business plan around the law, which is what companies across Europe are doing right now. They're panicking about these regulations and they're restructuring everything to kind of shoehorn into the regulations. It's completely the wrong way around for the next 3 to 5 years. Everything you should be doing is designing your business around the data. If you just tweak your current business models. It's like hearing a tsunami warning and leaving the house with an umbrella. It's a question of scale. A lot of brands are just responding with a coat of paint. They're upgrading their privacy policies. They're kind of getting a little bit better technology in to make sure they can kind of manage their data a bit more. They're doing data audits and so on. All of this is obviously quite important when you're preparing for the landing of a new regulation. But it's really a blindfold, and it's seducing everyone into thinking that they're doing enough. Whereas I would say, no, you are not doing enough. If you look at the direction of travel, it's only one way. Technology is going to allow us to do way more cool stuff. Today is the old way. The way businesses are using data and technology, that's how it was yesterday. It's not going to be that way in 2 or 3 years' time. Companies need to start rethinking what business that they're in. I mean, is Unilever going to be a company that manufactures and sells ice cream to consumers in 5 years' time? Yeah, almost certainly we will be selling ice cream. But if we do things properly, it'll be data that's telling us what ice cream to make, where to sell it, what innovations are coming, and so on. It'll all be driven by data. And it'll be the data that's telling us what to do, not us deciding what to do and then using data to validate it. So I really urge you to start thinking about building today for a vision of tomorrow. They say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. Now, whether you approach this by building brands with purpose, as we have done with our sustainable living plan, very valuable way to re-engage consumers. Other people are designing devices. The Nespresso, for example, is another innovative way. It's a bit old now, but it's just rethinking how you are engaging your consumers to create this lasting, meaningful one-to-one relationship. Now, what works for one company will not work for another, and what works today will definitely not work tomorrow. But this is where you guys, the marketers, can work your magic. From a strategic perspective, it's really valuable just to sit down and work out what data you actually need or will need in the future to drive the kind of marketing and innovation that you have. And once you know that, obviously then we need to work out how to get it, and that's where the business models will start to change. Whether you collect it yourself, trade your data with other people's data, or simply buy it in, the business model must ensure that you have access to that business-critical data. Now, looking at certain ways to do this, I would say one of the first things you should do is ask Santa for a brand new tech stack in your Christmas list. Now, marketers, I appreciate, are no more responsible for building a tech stack than a Formula One driver is for building his car. But if you haven't got a decent car, you don't stand a hope in hell of winning the race. Now, there are legal and commercial reasons why having a good tech stack is absolutely non-negotiable nowadays. For legal reasons and commercial reasons, you need to have total visibility of the data in your business ecosystem. That sounds so obvious, but so few companies, even today, actually know what data they have. The worst thing is people run campaigns, they collect a load of data, it sits there in a database, they leave the company, and it just sits there because no one else knows whose data it is, and no one wants to go around deleting data. That's one of the first things you do, just delete the whole bloody lot. Unless you know what it is, delete it all and start again, because if it's more than 6 months old, it's probably got very little value anyway. You really need to be able to collect data in a way that you know exactly what rights come with it, okay? In other words, for any given bit of data at any moment in time, you should be able to tell a regulator, I'm allowed to use that data for these purposes. Yeah. Again, sounds really simple. Very few people have the technology that actually has that capability, that sophistication. The ability to enrich the data in real time, to purge it, forget it. All of these things, honestly, are non-negotiable. Not because the law demands it, but because if you can't do this stuff with your data in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, when all this AI stuff and machine learning really starts to change your business, then you're going to be screwed. It's going to cost you a lot of money, because you'll be completely over a barrel. And it'll take you years to kind of implement it. Now, I don't want to go into the detail of what we're doing, but one of the things we've done is this people data center where you're building these CRM capabilities with social listening and consumer engagement and customer services. But basically, our PDCs are sophisticated enough where our marketers can just ask it a question, and you get the answer back. And the only challenge we have now is just getting people to ask the right questions. But this is a journey, and we're only at the beginning of it. Now, at the risk of stating the obvious, if you don't own the data, you're going to have to buy it or starve. Buying it is often the right strategy. There's a lot of data where it really makes sense to go and get it from a third party, but there is a growing risk that companies who don't own the data will be held to ransom by those that do. Google and Facebook alone now take in about 1/5 of the global advertising revenue, just those two guys. And I'm sure they must be using a lot of that money to build bricks around their walled gardens, which are going to make it harder and harder to get their data, unless you have your own data to trade. So building up these databases yourself of your own consumers, data that you own, becomes a really valuable asset that you can then trade. Now, as Halloween is approaching, I thought I would use this little analogy of vampires and blood. Effectively, if you think of vampires as brands, now people currently are instinctively nervous about sharing their data with brands. As you know, a vampire cannot enter your house unless you invite them in. But, people don't generally want to invite these bloodthirsty vampires in, and they'll lock you out. So I would say you want to be a bit more like nursey. Because people like nurses, you'll be quite happy giving a nurse a pint of blood, and you'll be glad for it. So in this world of data, I kind of want to encourage you to be a bit more nursey and a bit less like a vampire. Now, I haven't really mentioned trust, because I kind of think it's been over talked about. It goes without saying, right? You should be doing all of these things, not because the law requires it, but because it's simply ethically the right thing to do. If we want to create a world where people really open up and share their data, then we need to establish that trust. Now, the WFA did a survey recently which showed that actually brands, pretty much all the brands in this room, are way more concerned about damage to their reputation that comes with kind of data breaches and information security hacks than they are about the fines that will come with the new GDPR. And that says a lot, right? It means that trust is actually more important to businesses than the money. So I recognize that this is not easy. I can't give you the answers to how you go about and solve the business issues for the next 3 to 5 years. But I urge you to go back to your office, look at your company, think what it's going to be like in 3 years' time, and ask yourself, what do I need to get the board to completely change our business? So instead of being today is the old way, you're actually starting to reinvent your company for the future. It's probably going to be the most uncomfortable thing since puberty. It is really shape-shifting on acid, and the side effects could be fatal. But I think it is time to kind of hunker down, build your tech chrysalis, and wait a few years and then pop out with these magnificent wings that will carry you through the next evolution of man.